Hi everyone, I'm Carl Henrik, and I lead security on the product marketing team here at Okta. Agentic AI is all the rage these days. From stakeholder conversations to executive asks, everyone wants to adopt AI agents and now. But it's not as easy as flipping a switch for most CIOs. They're balancing a lot of inherent risks and challenges, from data security to cost to governance and so much more. In this conversation, we're joined by Jenna Cline. Jenna is Okta's SVP of Business Technology and has been on the forefront of our internal process related to evaluating, deploying, and scaling AI agents securely. This has been a journey Okta has been on for the better part of a year, and we've seen how that has changed and the real-life use cases that have and haven't worked internally here at Okta. So that's what we'll be spending time talking about the balance between the hype and the reality of AI agents, and maybe what's next for Okta. So Jenna, welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So Agentic AI is suddenly everywhere, but there's still confusion around what it means for enterprise IT. So I'd love to hear your take on how you would define AI agents and what that means to you.
Yeah, AI is everywhere. It is all I talk about these days. So this is a very timely topic for me. AI becomes real for me in the enterprise. When you're running enterprise IT, we have all the care abouts that any company would have for security and for compliance and for regulation, and also things like how are we managing the cost? This is all changing. But especially because AI is still a rapidly evolving technology. And so we want to be able to allow teams to innovate and experiment and learn this technology as it's deployed. So for us in IT, this becomes real when we're making that happen. And we want to be able to manage AI securely in the enterprise.
Now, you talk a lot about the balancing act inherent in that. You must be speaking with a lot of peers in the industry on this too. Yeah. So I'd love to hear a bit from you about their perspective on this. Is it hype? Is it value? Is it risk? Or just another thing on the roadmap?
Yeah, the answer is yes. It's all those things on the roadmap. Of course, there is some hype. We usually see that when we have a new technology come out, but the potential is huge. And that's one of the things that's unique around AI is it's not a specific technology for a specific use case. It's a very broad technology that can be used in many use cases. And so what we want to make sure we are doing is balancing out that potential with what actually makes sense. What we don't want to do is say AI for everybody and you get AI and you get AI. That's just going to add a lot of complexity that we don't want to manage. We're balancing the innovation with decisions that we need to make for our long-term architecture. Because it's moving very fast, this is presenting a lot of unique challenges for us in balancing short-term decisions with long-term impact on the enterprise.
No, that balancing act is a really big harbinger of culture, probably here at Okta. So talking about culture, talking about how we do things differently, I'd love to hear from you when this really became real for us here at Okta. When was there a specific inflection point at which you knew this was no longer theoretical?
There wasn't a specific moment, but there were two projects in particular that really drove home how we needed to start thinking differently about deploying AI in an enterprise. The first is when we were going live with an AI chat mode product that anybody in the organization could use. We needed to think about, just like we do with many technology products, but in this one in particular, we had to make sure that everybody could use this tool, every level, every role, and globally. And so that was a big moment where I said, oh, this is becoming real, right? When we're making something available to all of Okta. While we were doing that, we also had to make sure we thought about the change management of this. When someone uses this tool, what tools do they need in order to be successful? How do we think about the communications and the change management when we deploy this? When we did go live with that, I remember the day that we did it. I had employees around the globe pinging me within those first few days, commenting on this. And it was overwhelmingly positive. They had more comments, suggestions, questions. I had to then get those to my team so we could start funneling those, creating FAQs that everybody had it. I've never had a technology deployment like that previously in my career where everyone was so excited about having this new technology. That really became real for me in that moment. The second one is when something we were doing more internally on my team's side. We had started building out very simple use cases with agents. And we had a couple that were question and answer, like a bot that would help with policy questions for the legal team, for example. But what we quickly saw that those use cases were already starting to evolve and they were going to become more complex use cases. And we were going to have to start thinking through how are we going to implement agents that start working more independently, that start working with other agents, that work within a service or maybe take an action within a service. And that for me, especially working at a security company, was something that we were going to have to think through and quickly, because the demand for these complex use cases were coming at us fast.
Yeah. Speaking of complex use cases, I think that ties in pretty well to my next question, which relates to our platform-centric approach here at Okta. You've mentioned this on a couple of occasions, and I'd love to hear from you a bit about what you feel that means and how we've thought about this.
So when we had to think through this, sometimes it can be really difficult to think through something so broad that has such a broad definition of the technology, as well as the number of different areas that you can deploy this technology. So instead of thinking about it that big, I like to think about it in 3 different buckets. The first is around AI that we do for the personal productivity use. So AI generally available to all of Okta employees and all globally. That's one use case that we have that we define and we support with a number of tools. The second bucket is around any of our existing SaaS applications or other applications that we have that are starting to introduce AI features. So we're seeing this a lot in our business application space in particular. A lot of SaaS companies are releasing their own AI features. So we need to have a structure for how we thought about making the decision whether or not to turn on that kind of AI feature. And then the third bucket that we have is custom AI. And this is where we are building our own agents specifically for very narrow use cases or something that's unique to Okta and how we do business. And in those cases, it makes sense for us to build our own agents rather than going to the market with something. So we've been thinking about, in particular, that third use case, because that's where we see a lot of tremendous business value, not just the personal productivity with AI, but the business value. So those are the ones we want to go after specifically for that value, but also they're going to be the most complex, and we needed to have a certain set of decisions and frameworks in order to build those.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. And I think to your point there, one of the biggest risks that we see when it comes to deploying agentic AI is, on the one hand, identity sprawl, but also privilege abuse. If you're a non-human identity and you're overprivileged, that can lead to some very real consequences. So when it comes to that, how are you thinking about securing both access and governance at scale?
Within that framework that I mentioned, the trust layer is critical to ensure safe and governed Gen AI. And this includes things like guardrails, permissions, action controls, robust authentication, and full auditability of our agents. Luckily for me, this is where our products come into play. For one of our examples that I mentioned earlier, where we're building a Slack bot, those bots are acting individually. And we want to make sure that that agent is only accessing content and data for which the user they're acting on the behalf of has access to. And so that's where Auth0 FGA can come into play. When we get into more complex use cases that involve multiple agents, so for example, an agent that pulls data, a second agent that would analyze that data, and a third agent is building a report around that data. We want to have more complex workflows while maintaining the security of that complex use case, and that is where Auth for Gen AI comes in.
So in your framework, you emphasize memory, you emphasize autonomy, and orchestration. So among the 3 of those, what has been the hardest to implement and why?
The hardest has actually been the demand. We have a tremendous demand right now for building more AI. Now, IT teams always have this problem. There's always more demand than we have capacity, so it's nothing that we are not used to. But the demand has been pretty tremendous for this, mostly because of 2 things. Number one, the broad applicability to use cases for AI, as well as the rapid iteration of new AI features and tools and models as they become available. So with those 2 things, we are managing demand in a very dynamic environment. The uniqueness of this AI opportunity has allowed us to think a little differently on how we meet that demand. We decided early on that instead of carving out a team that was going to be dedicated to working on AI, we wanted to have as many people in my organization be building AI as we could. And so we have a philosophy that we call democratizing AI. What we're doing is the central team define some of the best practices and the frameworks that we are using, especially when we build custom AI. But we are doing that in service for my other application teams to be able to use so that everybody in the business technology org can then be working on AI and standing up AI in order to meet that velocity. The Gen AI framework that we have for those custom builds, it's built around reusable components that we can leverage for similar use cases. That way we're not recreating an agent every time we need to do it. It also allows us to build that on top of different LLMs. So if we need to have an LLM that's more appropriate for one use case versus another, we can swap that out. This framework allows us to then have broad applicability for our AI agents and be able to meet the demand with the velocity that my teams are building.
So you mentioned you've tested AI agents internally across sales, support, finance, IT, and a number of other teams. Among all of those, what is one of the most promising use cases you've seen internally, and maybe what's one that didn't pan out as well?
What we saw was very typical of what I see with some of our customers and my peers in the industry. We started with a few use cases that made a lot of sense for AI to augment or enhance. They were primarily around support. So our external customer support agents, as well as any end user support that we do internally within my organization. And those use cases, they make a lot of sense. The advice that I would give to somebody, you're not asking, but I'll give you some advice on how I would do things a little differently. When you deploy AI with a use case that involves somebody's day job and you're asking them to change the way they work, but you're also experimenting and learning from AI, the results of that proof of concept that you're trying to run with the technology can get a little cloudy because of that use case. Because it's not just about the technology and its effectiveness. You're asking somebody to change how they do their job. And so it is a heavy change management overlay. Back to that example I had earlier when we deployed AI for general personal productivity that impacted a lot of users. It needed a lot of comms and change management. When you're doing a specific AI agent use case for something that you're asking somebody to change, it's hard to differentiate the effectiveness of that deployment just for the technology itself or also because of the change. What I would do a little differently this time, and we have a few use cases now of this as well, is something that is more behind the curtain. So something that is interacting maybe with somebody on my team and a system and isn't something that is deployed out to a number of roles. That allows our teams to test out that agent and make some tweaks and understand it better without all the noise of the change management that might mess up some of the results of that experiment.
So one thing CIOs do care about is how they're measuring success. And I'd love to hear from you about how you're measuring success. What are the KPIs or the signals that you care about to tell you that an AI agent is acting the way it should rather than adding complexity?
I'm actually going to back up a little bit from that question and also think about more of our North Star that we have in business technology that's helping us to make the decision around where to place AI. In the early part of our conversation, I mentioned that AI has broad applicability and we had a number of use cases as well as high demand. We have a goal in business technology to remove 250,000 hours of manual work at Okta, which roughly equates to about 1 week for every one of our employees. That was the goal that we had, and we knew that we were going to be able to achieve that through a number of technologies, more integrations, some automation, but AI was going to be a big part of that story. So that allowed us to go after these use cases with some business value assessment in them to say, is that going to help us achieve our goal? And it gave us that North Star for why we were doing AI rather than just deploying AI for the sake of AI. So that's how we started. Then when we actually do AI and the agents themselves, it depends on the use case. So going back to those 3 buckets of whether or not we're deploying something because it's a general productivity, or if it's something that we're doing because the feature is in a tool that we already have, or we're building it ourselves, we have different measures for each of those. That's helped us evaluate the effectiveness of these deployments. For the last one, the custom build, where we often see the most value, but we see the most complexity, we will set at the beginning of that project, we'll set some expectation of the goals that we'd like to achieve to declare if it's something we keep going with or if we need to tweak it. That's usually around things like accuracy or customer satisfaction. Thumbs up, thumbs down on response rates, for example, is how we measure that. Internally, because we're using those modular components to build the agents, I'm also looking for leverage. If we built a module and we were able to use that for multiple agents, that's success for me because the team didn't have to recreate that. And I know we did a good job up front making sure that that use case added value to Okta.
Yeah, and those are some great insights that I'm sure folks can take and run with. To wrap us up, I would like to hear from you on for CIOs that are just getting started. What is one thing that you wish you could tell yourself today, the yourself of a year ago, when you're just starting to scale and think about how do you scale this securely?
Move faster.
Yeah.
We needed to move faster. We're doing that now. I'm really happy with the progress that we've made, even recently. When I think back to just 6 months ago and where we were experimenting and learning from some of this to where we're at now, it's the rate of change has been incredible. I haven't seen something moving this rapidly in my own career that expands many decades to what I'm seeing now with AI is Every day there's something new. I'm learning from the teams as well. Once we started offering more capabilities for folks around the company to be able to experiment for themselves, they have come back and shown us different things that we hadn't thought of as well. And so I'm seeing the value of democratizing the build of the AI within my organization and offering up these opportunities for the rest of the company to innovate. We needed to think at the beginning deeply about how we wanted to build this for scale, for security, for longevity, while also managing the cost, making sure that I had the skills I needed to be able to do this and to have confidence that I was monitoring all this within an architecture that was built for a publicly traded international security company. And that deep thinking up front really paid off in the end.
Well, thank you so much, Jenna, not just for your perspectives from speaking with peers, but also here at Okta, how you've evaluated, how you've deployed, and how you've scaled AI agents securely. I'm sure there's a lot more to come, and we look forward to hearing more about it.
Thanks for having me. This has been great.
Fantastic. And for those out there who are just tuning in, do be sure to listen to a couple more events that we have on the horizon, including our Securing Agentic AI Summit on August 13th, in which our leadership team, including Todd and Charlotte and Arnab, will chat with CISOs out there in the wild about this very topic, as well as a webinar we have in late August with Harish, our SVP of Product Marketing, and a couple folks over at Accenture to chat about some of the most common use cases, including HR, travel, and more. And as always, if you have any questions, please reach out.